Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our best practices in grades 3 through 5 literacy instruction as part of our comprehensive literacy webinar series. We're excited to have you all with us this morning. My name is Carmen Curick, and I'm the elementary English reading specialist at the Virginia Department of Education. So I'm excited to have you all with us this morning. Just as a side note, we do have the chat feature available, so if you have any questions or something to share, feel free to use that chat feature. We have someone manning the chat feature, and we will either answer your question or be able to email you back after our webinar today with an answer. So just as a quick agenda overview for you this morning, we did our welcome and introductions. We'll quickly go over some state focus areas for literacy instruction. We'll share some best practices that support the 2017 English Standards of Learning, and show you how to find those best practices in the curriculum frameworks. We will share some best practices for scaffolding complex text for grades 3 through 5 readers, and then we'll share some access to instructional resources that will support these best practices and to help to illustrate what that looks like in a classroom. So as always, when thinking about best practices, it's always helpful to start back at the Code of Virginia and see what that says and how that points us and guides us in our instruction. So if you look, this is the Standards of Accreditation written in the Code of Virginia, and it says in kindergarten through grade 3, the focus really is reading, writing, spelling, and mathematics. So when we think about 3 through 5, how does that in grades 3, it should still be reading, writing, spelling, and mathematics. When we think about 4 and 5, how does that reading, writing, spelling then turn into looking at meaningful parts of words and knowing how that works to create meaning for words that we may not know. And then that 680 hours of the required 990 hours of instructional time for students in elementary school should be focused around the 4 academic disciplines of English, mathematics, science, and history and social science. So if you think about a 6-hour school day, this would be about 3.8 hours across a day would be focused around these 4 areas. So then you can kind of think about how that breaks down for your community and for your schools and in your classroom. And this piece discusses the standards of learning and what the standards of learning should include, and that they should include but not be limited to the basic skills of communication, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So when you think about our standards of learning, especially our new 2017 English standards, that they really are geared toward this idea of critical thinking and communication, that we're all working towards this common goal. And then that in grades K through 3, that at minimum, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary development, and text comprehension. So thinking about, again, adding 4 and 5 to that piece, how does that fit in when we think about multisyllabic words and the meaningful parts of words? We still want students fluent with those pieces and knowing how those words work together. So we will start today with some best practices that support the 2017 English Standards of Learning. We often start with our research and our resources, but we wanted to start today with some practices that may just help understand and help students have success with the 2017 Standards of Learning. So we'll be looking at the English Standards of Learning curriculum framework this morning. So hopefully this document is not new to you, but that it is familiar and you've seen it before. And so we'll look at that a little bit to share where you might find some best practices listed in this document. And some revisions. So we'll start with some revisions that may be different from our 2010 Standards of Learning. So one of those is the idea of literary nonfiction in grades 3 through 12. So previously in grade 3, this was referred to as narrative nonfiction. It's the same thing, but when students get up into grades 4 through 12, they will then turn and hear the term literary nonfiction. So just to provide better alignment for all students, grade 3 will now refer to this as literary nonfiction, and it is a type of narrative text. It uses story elements and language to share accurate information about real people, places, and events. This can include biographies and autobiographies, but it is not limited to those. There are several different types and kinds of literary nonfiction out there that you will see. So we want to make sure we're exposing this to all students, but especially diving into this in grades 3 through 12, and that we're utilizing this term literary nonfiction across all of them. the clarification of theme and main idea in grades K-5. So students will now, in K-5, identify theme in fictional texts and poetry, and main idea in nonfiction. So teachers should teach theme as a literary term with fiction text and main idea with nonfiction text. We know as we're reading often fiction texts and a chunk of poetry that we may stop and think about, well, what was the main thing there, or what was the thing we read mostly about there? And that is a common best practice of reading through fictional texts and stopping to summarize with students. But we know when we think about a text as a whole, what ties it together, what are those common threads? We will use the word theme for fiction and poetry. So pairing literary and informational nonfiction text in grades is specifically written in grades 4 through 5 now. We know it has been in some of those higher grades in middle school and high school, but bringing it down as a practice for grades 4 and 5. We know even kindergarten and first grade teachers are often very natural at pairing text for students. They will often find a song that matches a story that they've read, or a nonfiction book or article or photograph that kind of pairs with something that they've read that's fiction. But it is specifically written now in grades 4 and 5. So through these standards, students will be analyzing similarities and differences between paired fiction and nonfiction texts. Text can be paired based on similar themes, topics, or patterns of events, and pairings might include books, articles, poems, media, or graphics. There's lots of different ways out there to pair text in order to help students gain understanding with the theme or the topic that you're working towards. And then a greater focus on the writing process. So just looking across K-12, looking at how writing process increases in complexity and rigor. So you can see in this little kind of list here how students begin in kindergarten with narrative and descriptive, moving to first grade, adding opinion, and then in second, third, and fourth, really kind of working through all of those as well as expository. And then in grade 5, kind of turning those opinions, how do I turn that opinion into something that I can persuade somebody? How do I have my opinion but now persuade somebody to kind of see my opinion or understand my opinion? And then just as 3 through 5 teachers and educators, just to know, it's helpful to know where students are going with this information or with this knowledge. So in 6th grade, we're now adding reflective writing. In 7th and 8th grade, we're still working on expository and persuasive. 9th and 10th, we're adding analytical. And then you can see in 11th and 12th is argumentative. So once students get into middle and high school, they're beginning to combine some of those modes of writing. In argumentative, we might have some narrative with some research kind of embedded in there. So it's important that students have this foundation in elementary school so that they're able to begin to combine some of those modes once they get into middle and high school. So when we think about the strands of the 2017 English standards, they are communication and multimodal literacies, reading, writing, and research. So even though they are listed separately in the curriculum frameworks, they are meant to be taught seamlessly, or they are meant to be seamlessly integrated in the classroom. So even though they may be listed separately, they should not be taught separately. We don't necessarily have a research day or a writing day or a writing week, but they should always be combined. That's how we often work in the real world. We're moving from communicating to researching to reading to writing. So that should be what instruction looks like in the classroom. So when we think about the spiraling of skills, we often have topics that we will see mentioned in grades kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade. For instance, setting. Setting is something we all often see come up in our standards and in the text that we read. But thinking about how that spirals, what that looks like in kindergarten versus how that looks different when students get to 3rd grade, and how that even looks different when students get to middle school and high school. So it's important that you're always reviewing the grade levels before you and after you to see how you're building upon their prior knowledge and how you're getting them ready for where they're going. So we will look at an example of what this looks like together today. if I can get the slides to switch. Oops, there they go. With text features. So this is just kind of what a vertical articulation of a standard might look like for text features. So you can see in first grade, students in 1.10D, students are identifying text features such as pictures, headings, charts, and captions. Students then move into third grade, so we can look at standard 3.6C, and students are previewing and using text features, including, and then there's some added there, table of contents, headings, pictures, captions, maps, indices, and charts. So you can see that simple. We've moved from identifying some to previewing and using them, and we've added a couple more there. So we can't just stay in that identification phase. Third graders are really previewing and using this in the text that they're reading. And then in fifth grade, using text features such as type, headings, graph, and graphics to predict and categorize information. So there are several verbs there. We often think of the verbs that we need to use to accomplish the standard, but in fifth grade, there are almost 3 there that we would need to think about. We're using text features. It gives some examples. Then we are predicting and categorizing information. So just thinking about how that changes across elementary school. And then in 8th grade, so we have to be able to do 5th grade so that in 8th grade we can apply knowledge of text features and organizational patterns to analyze text selections. So now let's look at some best practices that you may see in the curriculum framework. We've looked at some revisions to the standards that may affect the practices that you use in the classroom, but let's look at some that are already written in the curriculum frameworks for us. This slide has a screenshot of the overview page for 4th grade reading. Each grade level and each strand has an overview page at the beginning. This overview page provides kind of a simple umbrella overview of what 4th grade reading is all about, or what 3rd grade communication and multimodal literacies are all about. But what is new in the 2017 curriculum frameworks are these teacher notes. Now, the teacher notes do help to provide some specification for some of the revisions in the standards, but they also help to provide some best practices that go along with the standards. So just looking quickly at this 4th grade reading one, some of the best practices that are listed there. Student choice, allowing student choice is a huge best practice in 3 through 5. We want students to have choice of what they read. Increased opportunities for silent reading. Students are reading longer and more complex text on and above grade level. Students are getting new vocabulary from the text that they're reading, and students are pairing text. So that is just a quick list of some that are listed there. Let's look at the 4th grade writing one, and you can quickly just glance and see some of the best practices that are listed in those teacher notes as well, that teachers are modeling. Teachers should utilize mentor text, referring to examples for students. It talks about the focus of writing in 4th grade. Teachers should integrate grammar with writing instruction. That doesn't mean we're giving kind of these separate grammar worksheets weekly and then having that grammar test at the end, but that we're integrating it with the writing instruction that we're doing. So again, just quickly, lots of specification on some of the revisions, but also some clarity and best practices that should be utilized in the classroom. So when we talk about this seamless integration of English strands, kind of thinking about what does that mean? So we have these strands: reading, writing, research, communication, and multimodal literacies. So the next few slides will kind of guide us through what that seamless integration looks like. So thinking about this visual of the rope here, how do we tie all these fibers together to create something that's strong and that will last? So successful integration of the English standards. Just thinking about just a quick list of some things that you can do in your classrooms. So in reading, pulling specific vocabulary from authentic text. Thinking about, we're not having weekly vocabulary tests with separate vocabulary words from what we're reading and then we test on Friday, but that we tie that together with the books that we're reading, because we as adults, that's how we often will learn new words and gain new vocabulary, is through the text that we read and using the context to figure them out. Pairing both fiction and nonfiction text, using a text-rich environment with a variety of text and media, having student choice whenever possible, utilizing writing as a process for a variety of authentic purposes, utilizing regular writing conferences, and the use of writing portfolios. Are students gaining new skills in writing, and then kind of going back in their writing portfolios to add those? Well, what piece have I done that I could add something to? Or looking and reflecting, how have I grown as a writer? And then that research is ongoing and embedded in the learning process whenever applicable. You know, research isn't something that we do separately. We're now going to do our research, but that it's embedded in the learning process. There are, you know, specific instructional pieces that we do need to teach students about how to research, but how do we embed that in the content that they're learning, and how do we embed that with all of the, how do we embed all the strands into that process? And then communication and multimodal literacies. Everything we are working towards should be this under this idea of communicating clearly, working together on a team, having those conversations. So how do we embed that all into producing communicators? And then some additional best practices for English instruction. Thinking about the use of text-dependent questions. How do we move from questions that are asking students, well, how did this make you feel, or how did this character feel, but how do you know, and what made you think that, and what in the text, what words did the author use? And then the use of inference questions, kind of going beyond the here and now with our questions and digging deeper, more than some of those concrete details in the text. And then the use of text-based vocabulary. We've kind of mentioned that before. How are we pulling vocabulary from the text that we're reading? Having students respond to reading on a daily basis, whether orally or in written format, should be both. And adding a writing component in every lesson. And then those frequent research components. We often, throughout the day, will think of something that we think, oh, I need to look that up, or I need to find more out about that, or what do I want to know more about that? So just showing how that process is natural and not something separate. Pairing text. So we talked about paired text as a revision in the standards, but we just wanted to also bring it up here as a best practice that is something that we're doing. So a paired text is two texts that are conceptually related in some way. For example, through a topic, theme, or genre. Paired texts are based on beliefs that reading is about making connections, and readers make personal connections between the books that they are currently reading and their past experiences. So there is a link in this PowerPoint to a YouTube video that'll also give a quick description on paired passages, so that's there for you if you want to kind of view that. But when we think about paired text and even text sets, this can include books, plays, articles, poems, functional text, graphics, and digital media. They often focus on a common theme or topic, but in classrooms we most often see that something that fits with the history and social science or science content that we're learning. We know that we never have enough time to quite fit all of that in, so how can we utilize these paired text opportunities to do that? And then comparing and contrasting text really helps to increase the level of thinking. When students are talking and reading and looking across multiple text, this really increases the rigor and the level of thinking and communicating that's happening in 3rd through 5th grade classrooms. So if you're thinking about this integration of skills and thinking kind of, where do I start with this? How do I even begin? This is just kind of a quick list of something that may support you with this effort. So one of the best ways to do this is through this idea of a thematic unit. And so you would want to choose a theme or topic, something that's relevant in the world and in your classroom. And then choosing a variety of text and media options, thinking, well, what's out there that would fit with my theme or topic? And then what strands am I going to incorporate? So you want to be able to do some pre-planning and think about, how will you utilize all the strands within this unit? How will students be writing during this unit? How will students be researching during this unit? And then selecting strands to introduce a review, or standards to introduce a review. So thinking about, what standards have we covered already? What are we continuing? What's kind of part of the process? And then what standards are going to be coming up that are new this time? And then thinking about your students, what will interest them? What are they interested in? What will engage them and motivate them? And then providing opportunities for shared and independent reading based on the topic that you're learning. And then modeling the writing process and meeting with students for writing conferences. How are we, again, kind of continuing this writing process and incorporating this into the unit? So hopefully this slide is familiar to you by now. We've used it several different places, but it really helps to illustrate this idea of just read, read, read. We want students reading every day, and this just has a quick, some quick bullet points on the importance of that, but also kind of what they need to be doing with that. So students need opportunities to read daily. That's every day. They need to read extended pieces of text and grade level material. All students need opportunities to read grade level text daily, including fiction and nonfiction pieces. Schools should provide students with opportunities to read and compare paired passages, fiction and nonfiction, on the same topic as appropriate. And when students are analyzing ideas in two texts and searching for textual evidence to support their conclusion, they are engaging in that deeper learning and that thinking critically. And we've been talking about deeper learning a lot in that term. So when we think about what does that look like in 3 through 5 literacy classrooms, this would be it. This really is that deeper learning. So we get a lot of questions though on how can I support students who aren't quite there on grade level text yet, that they still need some scaffolding and support. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next. How do we scaffold students through complex text? So first we just kind of want to remember what a scaffold is. It's something that is there to be supportive, to get us to accomplish something, to ready for the next step. So scaffolds are flexible. They're able to be moved in and out as necessary. So just thinking about, these aren't permanent, but these are there to kind of get students to that next step, to where we want them to be. So thinking about supporting vocabulary with students. How do we help students through these complex texts who need that support through the use of vocabulary? So often that might mean kind of having student-friendly glossaries there for students, or having pre-teaching some of the vocabulary. There's lots of different ways to kind of support the vocabulary for students, often reformatting the text, even chunking the text in smaller chunks, even just adjusting the print size of the text, providing picture cues as students are reading. Picture cues could be for the story or for a strategy you may want them to use. Using deliberate annotations. So that could mean numbering the lines of text, pre-annotating the text with a purpose, looking for key ideas and providing overviews to students, so something before they read to kind of get them thinking about it. And then the next one is using questions as planned scaffolds. So really kind of developing this strong series of questions before reading so that you can discuss it with students, that you're kind of planning systematically. So building from that basic comprehension level to that inferential level as your discussion moves on. You can also provide some hint cards to students to kind of direct them. So hint cards maybe based on the strategy or the question that you're asking, to direct them to maybe a place in the text or a strategy that you want them to use. Using paragraph lines or numbers, using section headings. There's lots of different ways to kind of have questions as planned scaffolds, but then support those as well. The next one is allowing time for reflection and discussion. So that could be have students writing in order to prepare for their oral discussion with their peers or in their class, or students could have an oral discussion with peers in order to prepare for a written reflection. So just allowing that talk time, either that thinking time before they talk or the talking time before they're ready to write, to reflect. It depends on the purpose of your instruction for that day and kind of what you're thinking about. But students that struggle to read often need that time with those peers to have those models in order to prepare either their oral or their written reflection. Providing many hours a week for independent reading. Just allow students that time at their independent level to apply what they're learning from those higher level text. We need to be instructing them through these, but how do they begin to go practice those in a text that's more comfortable? Accessing grade level text. So planning close reading lessons with grade level text, using short chunks of text. Even though we're having students interact with grade level text, that doesn't mean that has to always be that extended longer piece of text. And then locating complicated sentence structures. So kind of doing some pre-reading in the text beforehand, locating those sentence structures, and then really kind of breaking those down for students before and after they read, thinking about, well, what did the author mean here? or this is, you're going to read this, this is what this means. And then just being explicit with students, really telling them that this text may be more challenging, but this is what we're going to do to support ourselves through it. And then just teaching them what you want them to know. So this is what we're going to be learning today as readers. And then often just kind of being explicit about telling them what pronouns are referring to. Sometimes when a text gets into, well, she and he and her dog and some of those things, that can often be confusing, and just a simple scaffold we can provide for students is just to tell them what the pronouns might be referring to. So this is just a quote from Jennifer Saravello that just to help illustrate the point of scaffolding complex text. It's not always the text, it's what you do with it. So just thinking about sometimes it's not that the text may be too difficult, it's how we are supporting students through that text that's really important, and how we can help them access text. And then some of the resources that we use today to get to help us understand scaffolding complex text are listed at the end. One of those is from Jennifer Saravello, so feel free, there's a link. Please click and explore some of that information later. So now we're going to get into some writing. So teaching elementary school students to be effective writers. So this information comes from an IES practice guide, which is put on the What Works Clearinghouse website, which is published by the U.S. Department of Education and the Institute for Education Sciences. They put together a panel of experts that study research from across the nation and across the world to kind of make recommendations. So this is what we know from research. So these are our recommendations for elementary writing. So these are the 4 recommendations for elementary writers. So we're kind of go through those together, but also thinking about, we'll make some notes on each of those as we go. And just to kind of emphasize this idea of writing, we know that writers are readers. We can't leave writing kind of to the tested grades. That doesn't create readers, and that doesn't help reading comprehension in the grade level that you are teaching currently now. We know that effective writers are going to be effective comprehenders in reading, and communicators and critical thinkers. So this kind of leads us into the recommendation number 1 for elementary school writing, and that's provide daily time for students to write. So the guide recommends at least 30 minutes a day for kindergarten for teaching those skills and strategies and allowing students to go through the process of writing. But it goes up into an hour a day for older elementary students. So that would be an hour for kind of teaching the skills, teaching the strategies, but also allowing students to go through that process writing. But this also could include maybe a science lab that you're doing where students are kind of recording their observations and reporting out those observations. So this includes time for writing in the multiple content areas as well. Recommendation 2 is teaching students to use writing for a variety of purposes. So just the recommendation shares many strategies for engaging students within the writing process. You can kind of go through this document and look further if you need some specific strategies, but there are strategies to help students pick ideas, whether it might be a heart map or a jot list, or lots of different ways to help students gather their ideas and pick an idea. Lots of different strategies for organizing, all the way to as well to sharing. We can't forget sharing, but students need to see those authentic audiences and seek that peer feedback. So we constantly need to be sharing as part of the writing process. And then recommendation number 3, teaching students to become fluent with handwriting, spelling, sentence construction, typing, and word processing. So we're going to kind of break this one down a little bit because that's kind of a meaty recommendation. But when you think about a really, really young child who's just beginning this writing process, they'll kind of scribble all over the paper and they'll tell you a whole story for what that scribble means. This child has learned that what I write stands for what I think. But as they get older, they're often working to express their stories and ideas on paper, as well as use their developing spelling knowledge to identify the sounds they need to express those ideas. Those writers have 2 huge jobs that they're kind of working through, and it's a hard balance. But we know students have not developed fluency with their letter formation and the ideas they want to express. Those ideas begin to change. So if they don't have that fluency with those handwriting and that letter formation, then their writing no longer acts as the symbol for those ideas. So we know handwriting is not only essential for letter learning, but fluency with expressing their ideas. So just thinking about as students grow and begin to express their ideas in a variety of modes, these practices need to be implemented daily, such as word processing and utilizing technology for processing. Just like handwriting, we want students to be fluent with that to express their ideas. Students have to be fluent with that typing and that word processing, or else we know their ideas and their thoughts will begin to change again. And even in second and third grade, we're really working through that explicit handwriting instruction with cursive. So students should really be kind of working towards fluency with this as well in fourth and fifth. And then recommendation number 4, creating an engaged community of writers. This recommendation shares some ways just to create a strong community. So some of those ways are the teacher acting as the writer within the writing community. So thinking about modeling, but not only just modeling, but sharing your feelings and your thoughts about writing with that community. Providing choices on writing. So that doesn't always mean providing a choice on a topic. Yes, it does often mean that, but how can they have a choice of how they publish their writing, or having a choice of where they sit to write, or the tool that they might use? Having opportunities for students to collaborate as writers, having those peer-to-peer interactions, and then providing that continuous feedback, so that you're having those writing conferences, continuing to provide feedback and show students that you're supporting them along this process. So just thinking about continuing this thought about writing instruction, but we want that writing instruction to also be connected to the reading instruction. So how do we make those connections to both of them? We can do this through utilizing mentor text, that students are reading like a writer and then writing like a reader. So we read the text to often have meaning, but then we can often go back and read the text to look at the author's style and structure, appreciate the author's craft, so that students will then begin to use that in their own writing. That we incorporate daily writing. So you could use this as a warm-up prior to the beginning of a unit of study. We incorporate writing into formative assessments. So after a thought-provoking reading, discussion, or class experiment, students are just writing to jot their thoughts down. So that we're really showing that we don't only write during writing time. And then we find authentic writing opportunities. There's lots of different ways we often are writing for kind of public consumption now in this very social world. So how are we providing those safe opportunities for students to do that in class as well? To have some professional writing opportunities. There's often some kind of closed social educational opportunities or websites that you can kind of go to help students with this as well. And just thinking about this as the writing as the forgotten R, we know with the elimination of the grade 5 writing SOL, this often threatens the writing and research instructional time in classrooms. But we know writing, like reading, is a life skill and should be included in all curricular areas. It's a very active process, and we know that students that are writers will be readers as well. So just thinking about how much writing your job requires on a daily basis. We're constantly moving back and forth between reports and logs and lists and emails, and so this is what we want writing instruction or writing opportunities to look like in the classroom too. And really kind of focusing on this idea of teaching writing. You can see in these 2 columns, it really illustrates the difference between assigning writing versus teaching writing. So students, if you're assigning writing, students are only writing to a teacher selected topic. They're given a task, but not much instruction on how to complete it. So because of this, you will often see minimal improvement in writing, because students will just continue to write in the same form, in the same fashion. And then they're only rewriting to correct errors in usage and mechanics. And then when students are teaching writing, they're often selecting their own topic, purpose, audience. The teacher time is really spent teaching these skills and strategies up in front of students and with students, kind of side by side in this work. And that students are using models and strategies to complete their assignment. They have something to work towards and a model to look at, and that they're constantly moving through this process. So we know that when writing is taught, teachers are modeling by writing with students, revealing the hard work of writing, kind of sharing that struggle, and then thinking aloud through the revision of their writing. And that revision is okay. It's part of the process and it's natural. And the editing only after revision is complete. That students also see revision and editing as those two different parts of the process. So we just wanted to point you towards, we've talked a lot about best practices and reading and writing, but we wanted to point you towards some instructional plans that may kind of help to illustrate this. This is a screenshot from our website on the Virginia Department of Education that has our English instructional plans listed. We had a team of educators from across the Commonwealth, educators and specialists this summer, come together and really collaborate to write these plans together. But there's a link here at the top that will take you to this website and just kind of provide a little introduction on how these plans are integrated, how they're comprehensive. They are comprehensive in that there are differentiation techniques for English language learners. There are differentiation scaffolds for all learners. There's writing components within the reading plans. There's reading components within the writing plans. There's all the materials listed that you would need. Lots of different ways that these are just kind of comprehensive in that nature, and that they're integrated. They include all of the strands within the component. So, and that teachers will need some kind of pre-planning. These aren't meant to be kind of one and done lessons, but some of these plans could be done as a little mini unit within themselves. So just that kind of pre-planning that needs to go into play to help teachers use these as a springboard for their own planning time. So if you click this link, it will take you to this page, and you can see that the plans are all listed by strand, reading, writing, communication, research, and then kind of broken up between grade bands. So again, thinking about looking at the ones before your grade and after your grade to see how they change is really important, because they really do kind of illustrate this in this. You will see the plans linked by their main focus SOL, but then when you open the plan, if you clicked on one of these links, this is just a screenshot of two of the plans that are there, but you will see all the other SOLs that are integrated into this. So you'll see kind of the main focus one is the one that it's labeled by, but then you will see the multiple strands and the reinforced SOLs that students will be hitting by doing this instructional plan. This is just a list of all the professional resources that we use today. So please feel free to explore these. There's the practice guide that we use for effective writing, helping students through complex text. So feel free to browse those as time allows. And this is our contact information, so please feel free to stay in touch. Let us know what's going on in your division. We're always happy to hear the great things that you all are doing, and reach out with any questions that you may have about this. So thank you for tuning in today, and we hope it was helpful for just kind of reflecting and taking inventory on what's happening in your division and your classroom. And we hope this will help kind of think about, well, are all of these things happening? Are they happening explicitly and systematically? And what do we need to continue and do more of and less of, and that nature. So thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.